Welcome to the Caffeine Stream on Caffeine and Philosophy.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Caffeine Stream. My name is CB Robertson. This is episode 56, and we're joined by a repeat guest. I can't get rid of her. And this is really more a subject you wanted to talk about, but it segues nicely into some subject matter that I'll be talking about with another guest very soon. So,
and several topics you've talked about already.
That's true. In the vein of Psy-Ops, we have lined up a conversation with a very interesting gentleman about, among other things, I think we might end up talking about Israel and Palestine as well, but about psychological infiltration and subversion tactics. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about something that's a little more...
Still subversive.
Well, yeah, but a little bit more precise. Mm-hmm. And that is autism. Why don't you start by telling us what got you on this, strain of thought?
Well, I have been developing this personal theory, I guess, just my observations of people on the internet, right? I am a passive observer of a lot of internet content, and also, once upon a time, was homeschooled. So my awareness and knowledge of autism is possibly higher than average, just due to proximity.
Defeating zero stereotypes here.
Absolutely none of them. Oh, my poor friend who was, we suffered through many years when he always had his hands in his pants. We were just like, dude, take your hands out of your pants. And eventually he did grow up to find pockets, but there was do you not know my poor friend? He liked the waistband squeezing his hands.
What age range are we talking about?
He was like between 10 and 14. I think by 14 he'd aged out of it. But
okay, but still old enough to know better at 10.
Definitely should have known better, except for the profound autism with the dude. So anyway, very, very, very familiar from proximity with actual autists, but also with the full spectrum of what I'm going to call fake autists. Everyone from people who call it autiste, who are not autistic, but just like to be on the internet, which is actually not a form of autism.
Yeah. 4chan in particular.
Exactly. And then all of these self-diagnosed TikTok autists.
Yeah.
And
which is like the left-wing version of people who like frogs a little bit too much.
Well, but so here's the thing, though. That's why I think autism is a psyop, because I think autism is the in that gets all the right-wingers and segues them and diverts their attention into a path that then to skip over several steps in the garden path gets them to Marxism is my
to Marxism.
Yes.
Really? Okay. So I have my own little observation, because there's this pseudo finding. I don't even know if it's founded on any research, but it's a belief that autistic people are immune to propaganda. Mm-hmm. You might see this go around a few times. And it's a very flattering thing. And it's exactly the kind of thing that would not persuade someone who was actually immune to propaganda, mm-hmm. when you think about it. Because all it is it's flattering the reader who, if they believe they're autistic, believes that they are immune from propaganda, not realizing that what they are reading is propaganda. Or it flatters someone who, believing that they have seen through a few instances of propaganda, which hopefully everyone in 2024 can do at this point. If you can't see through any propaganda at all, you've got some work to do.
You probably have not yet found this podcast.
Yeah. Probably, yeah. But like if you have seen through a few instances of propaganda, then the claim that, autistic people are immune from propaganda can lead people to begin to wonder, do I have a bit of the tism? Because look, I have this symptom.
Smart, yeah.
I have this symptom of invulnerability, at least to some degree. And so there's all kinds, which is ironically, as mentioned already, propaganda. So there is this.
Meme propaganda is some hot propaganda, I'll tell you what.
It is, and ironically, people who don't have an intuitive grasp of human emotions are also not going to be good at memes. Mm-hmm. So if you have what I will call a refined taste in memes, you are almost certainly not autistic. Obviously, I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't diagnose or undiagnose you.
You are no more or less qualified than all of the TikTok autist doctor therapists.
Oh God,
already.
That is the state of things. Yeah.
Right. Well, okay. So this is a small digression that is related because I watched a video recently that wasn't by any particularly political person, but she was talking about the prevalence of internet literacy and there's a weird phenomena happening that apparently is like really hitting school-aged like Gen Z kids. They're no more tech literate than like boomers as far as knowing how things operate or how to navigate like in a context reduced way. So whereas you have like probably I would say 50% of Gen Xers and up got no computer education when they were young because it wasn't a thing. And like there's like late Gen Xers and the ones who like kind of had a personal interest who got very, very computer literate right away. And so, everybody who runs a tech company right now, I think is technically Gen X. So they're all fine. They're very well educated on like they know how to type and they know how to use a desktop computer and they know how to search the internet and differentiate crap
they
from
know
not.
They might even know some Excel formulas.
Oh my God. You just gave me flashbacks to a boomer teacher who wouldn't use Excel formulas, and all of us in the class were like, oh my God, I'm dying. It was so painful to watch her. Anyway.
Such a millennial complaint.
Oh my God. It was. And then there's like the third category. There's don't know how to use Excel formulas. Those of us millennials who do know how to use them. And then there's this intermediate group who just use them so inelegantly that it's gross. And you're just like, oh, this is perverse. It's like, anyway, like I wish I could unsee it.
Those are actually very skillful people that just have a developed sense of humor.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, it's Chris.
Oh God. We're gonna make a color map of the entire country using Excel spreadsheets, but we'll make the hot areas blue and the cold areas red.
Chris is all about evil UX.
But anyways,
okay, hang on. So anyway, there's this little epoch of us millennials who like we're supposed to be defined by the fact that like we came of age and computers came of age with us or whatever, and then we just blanket refer to everyone after us as being tech natives, and it's like yeah, I mean frankly. This is not a super great recommendation on my parenting, but like, can my toddler swipe my Instagram? Absolutely. Does she have any idea how any of this works? No. And she couldn't find files. And apparently this is a problem for like Gen Z kids who are like in high school currently. Can't figure out how to reverse image search photos. Can't figure out how to like, oh my God. I hit a website just recently. I was doing some research and I hit all of you millennials listening. Do you remember when you would hit a true first-gen internet web page that is centered text, side to side, colored background, just text, no links.
Like MySpace background that's like a pale blue with text in the background at like a diagonal angle, But
it was like, it's always the most useful like history articles and archives that are from, oh man. It hit so good when I found that. I was doing some research and I was like, oh my God, this brings me back, man. To like
So let's bring it back to autism.
Okay, hang on. Yeah, so what I'm saying is the phenomena of people who don't actually know how the internet works and don't know how to like can't find a file on a desktop, don't know how to operate things without it already being kind of preloaded into an app, are also disproportionately, both of the boomers and in some ways of Gen Z, very easy to manipulate with like AI art and bad memes and things like that. They can't like in a not insignificant way, they cannot, in the way that millennials were taught to.
These are the sort of people who might be personal friends with a Nigerian prince.
Indeed, but also the Gen Z kids who are like, their entire perception of the world already has a filter on it. You know what I mean? Like literally can't distinguish.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean.
Can't distinguish reality from, and you know, for the kids who grew up with you know, a significant chunk of their school years being taken out of the school system.
It's like real life, and the things that they do in real life takes on the feeling of like an interface with the internet world rather than the other way around.
And you get this phenomena that, I mean, we all know it, and us millennials are super aware of it in a way that other people are not. The awareness of when, like, for instance, we all know that the way the algorithm works, right, is that it's going to push the best produced content that gets the message across. And so while the rest of us might be comfortable navigating some like poorly produced YouTube videos, but the content was really good, Gen Z has been completely inundated with a feed formula that has buried that stuff so far that they never see it. And so their perception of literally how everybody else is interacting is as though all the beauty bloggers are the real people. That's everybody else. It's just them that is different.
I wonder if that's how Gen Xers feel about movies and action movies.
I think it is. I feel like it's part of the reason why a lot of movies are finally coming back around to using like practical you know, visual displays that are having to happen live.
The overproduction almost compensates for poor plot and poor dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's one of the reasons why Lord of the Rings actually stands up really well is because of how much work they put into making the visual, not having to rely completely on CGI, like certain battle scenes excluded. But
it is very, very highly produced and well produced, but it's borrowing its plot and its dialogue from a book that wasn't.
No, I just mean like the reason why it continues to be visually effective is because the CGI is used effectively, and things like the weird, you know, how they set up the wagon to make Frodo look smaller but be able to keep them both in the same shot. That's what gives it a sense of like immersion. Anyway, then I know, hang on, I'm going somewhere with this, which is to say, if your universe as a youngish person is disproportionately filled with, you know, the most attractive beauty bloggers, all of the people who are very well produced, and us millennials are in a funny way mostly more protected from it because we can see through the difference of like, oh, that's just really good production quality, right? If you have never seen bad production quality, you don't know that that's actually just really well produced content. You know what I mean? And so all of this to say that there's I feel like there's a prime target of people who can be basically made to believe that anything that they're doing in their comparatively 2D universe, which is their actual lived life with their acne and their like normal people clothes and things like that, is in some way pathological. And I think
so can I say would this be a concise way of putting it, that a normalized hyper reality of the internet creates the impression that what is actually normal in your real life, it primes you to be more susceptible to ideas that what is normal in real life is in fact pathological.
Yes, okay. That's where I'm going with this. Okay. And I think the effect you're seeing, and again, this is kind of to your point about like autistic people, you know, aren't susceptible to propaganda. It's easy, and probably for this mostly male audience, I think you guys can totally see how like the female to male trans movement among young people is complete like social contagion. This is girls on Instagram who got feelings and don't know what to do with it and turn into trans boys to get attention, and it's the new anorexia or whatever.
Whereas male to female is more of like a sports strategy.
You know, testicle injuries went up significantly in female sports right around, what was it, 2015? Yes. So, well, and then, I mean, I'm not even touching the reason trans is in here is because I think we can all see very easily the pipeline that happens between this disconnect between our internet world, which is taking up a significant portion of our lives, and the regular world, which is necessarily like less colorful, less exciting, less well produced than the internet. And we can so easily see that pipeline that's leading people toward trans, and or leading their mom to trans, and now the kid is trans. You know what I mean?
Your comment that the real world is less well produced than the internet world makes me think I should probably define what hyperreality is before I just use it casually and not explain it.
I mean, it makes intuitive sense.
What do you think a hyperreality is?
Hyperreality is the like some amount of demonstration through social media or like VR or whatever that is so convincingly real, but somehow just ever so slightly better, like, you know, like airbrushed and like no acne and frictionless. And so like if you were living in a whole hyper real Sims universe, it would be like living inside the Sims, as far as like you know, there's no friction. You go to the grocery store, you buy all the things you want, you come home, it all is in the fridge.
Traffic. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
I am a genius. I think I am not autistic.
So now the audience knows as well. You can look up what is it, Simulation and Simulacra or whatever the title is. I forget. It's the Matrix guy, although he disavows the Matrix, but
that is the socially appropriate thing to do, is to try to disassociate yourself from your a few occasional true statements. Anyway, so hang on. So where I'm going, I didn't mean to anticipate that you were going to interrupt me, but just in case. You
got me, actually. I was about to, because we've been on like 15 minutes of digression here. I'm sorry.
So with because we can see that pipeline as it pertains to the trans movement really easily, I think we are neglecting the other path, the other side of people who are getting sucked into the exact same phenomena with the exact same steps. And that, I think, is where the autism comes in. I think there is a huge thing going on the internet, and I see it all the time, of the self-diagnosis bullcrap of like, you know, I'm a woman, so of course I get all the like bipolar disorders and whatever, and anxiety, and like because I have anxiety I have to buy stuffed animals, and it's like, no, you have adult money and you want to buy what the fuck you want, it's fine, like just buy the stuffed animal. You don't have to have anxiety to buy a stuffed animal if you want to.
Pathological justification for your hobby.
Yeah, I mean, like, I drink tea because I like it. I don't have to be doing cottagecore. Like, it's fine. It's just, you know, whatever. So, like, I get the female ones. But, like, I also see all of the, like, oh, I've got autism because or I've got ADHD, or I've got autism because I have these hyperfixations, or, you know, like, I don't know how to talk with people socially. And it's like, maybe you spent 3 years in freaking lockdown. Maybe that's why you're having a hard time interacting with normal people. Like, it's not that deep, guys. But...
Feels like one big long exercise and pissing on you and saying it's raining.
Exactly. Well, so with but I nonetheless, I am seeing in my own personal life a disproportionate number of specifically men doing two things. One, if they're slightly older and they have somehow failed to launch in some capacity, coming to identify, to kind of explain away why they have yet to find a wife, why they have yet to buy a house, why they're still in a lame job or whatever, as being like, well, you know, maybe because I'm, you know, got a little bit of the tism. And hang on, we got a couple breakdowns of like the men who identify with autism.
They should first, you know, contemplate an alternative hypothesis, which is that they might be Italian.
The other hypothesis for why they don't have a wife yet is they might be ugly.
Well, I mean, the failure to launch, still living at home kind of thing.
Yeah, well, yeah, is this actually your culture and you were supposed to be here? So the model of autism as like, if you hear regularly the message that like, oh, because you really are super interested in guns or chess or Risk, let's be all Risk at all games that involve rolling dice, Legos or Warhammer 40K, which is apparently cool now because of Henry Cavill, like whatever your thing is, Magic the Gathering, oh my god, there's a Magic the Gathering location where you can go and play in a town near us within 15 minutes. And I'm like, how do you have enough people to need a storefront for that. But like, you know what? Some people really are autistic. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. But anyway, so they can use it as a crutch to explain away their failures and to stop trying. I feel like that's kind of the MGTOW route out. They're like, oh, because I'm autistic, like I just, whatever. And then it explains away their failure to be successful with women or whatever. So I feel like there's this certain portion that are the cop-out guys. And then there are the people who I think you just hear the message over and over again that like, oh, these behaviors are autistic, instead of recognizing that what makes a pathology is actually taking a behavior so far to excess that you actually cannot function. Yeah. That's what any disorder is. And so like the fact that you, I don't know, I'm an adult woman and I still like, I'll take a lock of my hair and like rub it between my fingers, which among small children would be considered like a self-soothing behavior, or a stim as they call it on the interwebs now. I'm not going to be ashamed of the fact that, I still do things to quote unquote comfort myself. I'm playing with my hair, right? Like it's not a maladaptive behavior. It's not something that I have to do to the exclusion of normal people behaviors. And it is in no way infringing on my ability to function in life. So like, it's not a pathology.
Right. Right. I was going to make a bad joke, but
thank you for also, it's extremely coquettish, and so all the boys like it. So anyway, but if you take all those behaviors and then you and you hear it regularly and you see everybody else moving on, and you see the internet is full of people who are married or who have tons of money so they can actually pour into their gun habit, and you're like piddling around with, your plinking guns or whatever that you can manage to afford. And like you hold down a job, but you also do like, you really like to come home and put on sweatpants. And it's like
way too much money on your Subaru WRX.
Oh God. Yeah. Right. And you can maybe start to internalize that, like, maybe I actually am autistic. And so there's like the people who are getting kind of victimized by it. And maybe just taking it as like, oh, it's not that big a deal. Like it kind of helps me to understand myself or something like that, who've been TikTok diagnosed. And then this is where I feel like they can lose the plot and get really at risk for becoming woke. And that is when you start to identify that these things that you do that are actually totally normal, very reasonable behaviors, are actually in some way pathological, that they are like maybe a little bit of stims or like maybe a little bit of comfort behaviors. So like maybe I actually do have repetitive behaviors.
Turning normal behaviors into diagnostic signals for some pathology. But
hang on. And you take those people and then they have they experience any new friction in the world, and they go, it offers the opportunity for that. Like if you hear, it's like pattern recognition. If you hear it enough times and then you run into a new situation where you fail to react correctly or something, or you no you go in the hallway and with some stranger or something or whatever, or you fumble any personal interaction even a little bit, and it reinforces that maybe you actually are autistic, and then pretty soon you start feeling like the world was not built for you to be in it. And that's where I think it gets either to like it could fork into like a suicidal ideation thing if they can't ever get skills to cope with it, and then eventually like find a wife and find somebody to be with and be happy. Or wokeism, where it's like, see, because the world wasn't built for us, and like this is where you need to explain woke Marxist ideology.
Right. Well, and here I might disagree with the intentionality behind it, because we were looking up numbers before we started recording this, and it was fascinating to see the diagnostics and the rates of diagnosis of autism in the United States. It was 1 in 10,000 in like the 1970s, and then it was up to 1 in 150 in like 2000. So it was like dramatic spike in like 1999, and by 2020 it's up to 1 in 54, which is like someone who's better at math than me can figure out what the multiplication is from 1.8% or from 0.001% to 1.8% of the population. That preceded this huge push of the modern form of Marxism that uses intersectionality and all of that stuff. Now, the Marxists have absolutely glommed onto this, and I think they see revolutionary potential, and this is why they push, the obsession with mental health and pathologies and overdiagnosing for their own reasons. But overdiagnosing seemed to be a thing prior to that, and it makes me wonder if there wasn't some pharmaceutical financial interest in spreading these diagnoses for decades, and then Marxists just figured out, oh, now that there's this huge percentage now of 2% is not small, of people with a lot of motivation, they have revolutionary potential, so we'll appeal to them and say exactly what you said. This world was not created for you, and in fact, from a social constructivist view of pathology, it's inherently oppressive and unfair, and ought to be overturned, especially if they can capitalize on the feelings of romantic disenfranchisement of men. So, which many autistic men experience more than normal. So, the James Lindsay thing is really the point about trying to capitalize on revolutionary potential. But the Marxists are fairly new to the game of creating that pathology. The idea arguably was first formulated by Herbert Marcuse when he talked about basically a new biology of socialism, and he had an asterisk where he says biology doesn't really mean biology in this context, but it means basically a new Soviet man, a person who by their nature cannot tolerate oppressive regimes. And this has, James Lindsay argues, turned into a program for turning people into the sorts of people who are dysfunctional in a capitalist society. Now, it is arguable whether autists are really dysfunctional at an economic level. They're certainly dysfunctional at a social level, but economically, I'm not so sure.
So here's where I have a lot of thoughts on this, because I don't know, to your point, the Marxists are not good at manufacturing a contagion that then has revolutionary potential, but they'll jump on to pretty much any bandwagon, and they'll discard it the second that hot potato is not useful anymore. So to the Marxists, we're all useful idiots just waiting to, ironically, we're all just social capital waiting to be used.
Indeed.
So,
revolutionary capital.
Yeah, just revolutionary capital waiting to be mined. The children yearn for the mines. But so what I'm thinking is like you said, they're not they can't manufacture it, but I think they can capitalize on a trend that was already going. And the thing that I would say, and make it worse for sure. But the thing that I think was driving a lot of this is feminism, which is not exactly the same as Marxism, but it's very adjacent. And I certainly believe in the disenfranchisement, the malicious intention to try to disenfranchise men from their own society by benevolent female actors who are just trying to level the playing field for girls. And where I think that is the worst is that the more that this society overall becomes a bureaucratic system, right? The more institutionalized it is, the more gatekeeping we do of information, and you need a 4-year degree, and actually you also need a master's, and blah, 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 blah. The more we push the idea that the trades are, low potential, you're just going to blow out your back doing that, there's no money being a plumber. And I don't know how many times I heard growing up, both honestly, even from my own parents, but, and they didn't mean anything by it, but we said it so habitually. I don't care if you want to grow up and be a garbage man, as long as you're happy. And what the hell is wrong with being a garbage man? Now, weirdly, it's one of the most dangerous jobs out there, but I don't know if that might be what's wrong with it.
It's actually been overtaken by arborists, which is also largely men. But
also largely men. what you do there is you make this I mean, you are not autistic to any degree, and yet you were absolutely maddeningly infuriated every weekend that you had to go to training in your apprenticeship program. You would come back, you're ready to write a letter to the editor of the newspaper. You were prepared for revolution. No, but you came back mad every time because of just the layers of dumb bureaucracy, the time wasting of like need so many classroom hours in order to qualify for your apprenticeship. And it's like, I could be at work making money for my family and learning this same crap if I was at work right now, instead of doing this on my weekend, on my Friday and Saturday. This is the dumbest rigmarole of like paperwork and filing things and stuff. And the more genuinely autistic you are, and I'm sure many men who are listening to this know exactly what I'm talking about, the more tedious paperwork you put in front of a dude, the more he wants to just opt out of this crap. And what used to happen once upon a time was that you had career paths that were perfectly viable, that people were encouraged to go into, and that there was not a lot of gatekeeping to get into, like being a plumber or an electrician or a carpenter or any of the trades, that were deeply fulfilling because you get to do stuff with your hands. You can think whatever monkeys with symbols things men think in their brains when they're doing stuff. And you have a wife at home taking care of your kids, and let's be honest, she's filing most of the paperwork, right? She's filling out the forms and stuff because she's good at that.
Well, and there's also a degree of like the paperwork that necessarily emerges, first of all, at scale, in a society that scales beyond certain levels, but also from the ideal of equality. So like back in the day, if you were a tradesman and you were an apprentice, there might have been some test, but it was largely based on apparent competence and reputation. And you have to serve your time, so to speak, of course. But, your skill was apparent to other people. But with all this talk of bias and inequality and so forth, the measures for advancement have to become more objective. You can't rely upon subjective measures of competence anymore, because that leaves hypothetically room for bias and room for racism or sexism or so forth. And so you have to bring in these layers of paperwork in the name of equality. Now, there's another dimension to this too, because one of the questions that was circling around my head earlier is like, inducing mental illness either for pharmaceutical financial reasons or for political aspirations and creating instability, whatever the case. Why autism specifically? And then you brought up feminism. There's a funny YouTuber who said feminism is basically the bipolar acceptance movement. They're obsessed with not the meaning of words, but the power of words and the effect of words and
feelings.
Well, and what they can do. Right. So, and there's a similar thing that happens with credentialism too. It's credentials were once valued because of what they symbolized. It's like you don't actually care about the master's degree. You just hunt around among people with master's degrees for a certain level of experience and mastery of a thing, but you care about the mastery. But now the mastery is within a bureaucracy is actually far less important to most people than the appearance of the mastery, than the appearance of the thing itself. And so I think some of the paperwork and the explosion of that kind of thing comes from that, and the feeling that if you're not at home with this, if you have this inability to navigate this increasingly Kafkaesque labyrinth of people designed by bipolar activists, I'm exaggerating slightly, but
no, seriously,
we might have shifted the middle, so to speak, and so what appears to be what was once a far extremity of social inability to navigate these kinds of obstacles now seems much broader.
Well, and this is, I don't want to sound too Illuminati like it's all about women, but like just the thing with the proliferation of government entities as well as private entities that are massive corporations, everyone loves to bitch about how there aren't enough women at the top. There aren't enough women CEOs, except that we're all currently living in the tyranny of female middle management, and involves a lot of freaking paperwork, and involves a lot of like tedious emails back and forth, and the appropriate amount of exclamation points so that you don't seem psychotic, but that you also seem enthusiastic and not mean, and all this kind of like corporate governance crap that is the natural byproduct of suddenly half of the workforce being female, and those are the jobs they're good at, the ones where we're like, oh, keeping track of every little all the invoices and everyone's reimbursement requests and blah 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 blah,
and everyone's birthday parties
and all that stuff. You take all of those women who used to do this stuff for their communities and who used to do this stuff at the church potluck and keep track of when Easter is, and you turn them into women who are like, oh, so and so is having a baby shower, and now we all have cake in the break room, which I'm not hating on cake, but I'm just saying that like the natural byproduct of injecting an entire gender into the workforce is that you need jobs that suit them, and the ones that suit them best are annoying office girl jobs. Because again, where are all the men who are, okay, fine, they're at the top of the CEO tower, yes, because all sociopaths are, but there also are the ones falling out of trees, getting crushed in garbage compactors, getting electrocuted on a high wire, like
it should be
linemen.
pointed out that sociopaths are overrepresented among surgeons and CEOs. And they're also overrepresented in prison. So, like, it's a kind of a mixed bag there.
Well, exactly, right? But I mean, that is the fate of men, and it used to be that was always the fate of men, was somewhere in the spectrum of like, being a tradesman or having a moderate to normal office job, and then you go home and maybe there's one secretary for the whole office and those kinds of things. Like the whole mix of your work experience is completely different. And so when you put a ton of paperworky gatekeeping bullcrap that girls are great at in front of a man, a high octane 18-year-old boy who's like, I'm ready to like make some money and fuck some chicks. And you get him full of all this paperwork. You send him to college and he's like, okay, I got through all that.
Paperwork is not the way to fuck
Paperwork
chicks.
is not, well, there's the certain sociopaths who can get through that initial paperwork to get to college, and then they go, and then they fuck all the chicks and they become lawyers and whatever. And anyone who can't get through the entrance paperwork, no longer, they've pulled trades from, they pulled, what's it called? Shop from class, from high school. They've very much disincentivized getting into that trade. They made the military gay. I mean, there's nowhere for all of these autistic men who are perfectly good providers, who would work their ass off and would be decent conversationalists at dinner for their wives, completely disenfranchise them from being able to get the kinds of jobs that would take their autism. Are we talking about
actual autistic guys, or are we talking about the sorts of guys who might falsely self-diagnose as autistic?
Both, because actual autists are what it seems to me, and I do not know, I have no data on this, it seems to me that there are enough autistics who get very much like handheld and like carried up the line to be like, please do data science, like please fix the internet, and so those guys get pumped into their pipeline because somebody handheld them to get them there, which is fine and is where they belong in society. I'm talking about all of the like, let's be honest, all of the autism spectrum people, all the people who are...
So normal people.
And normal men specifically. Yeah. You take all the normal men and you... the few who can get through the initial paperwork could go and just chew it up at university with all the women, and then they go do whatever, lawyery type, like you said, right? Credentialed thing. Or they never make it to college, and so then they end up in these really dead-end jobs, these unfortunate jobs that can't support an entire family, and it just it leads to an entire climate where they cannot do normal life stuff, and they feel, and because of the internet and because of self-diagnosis TikTok, come to the conclusion, rightly or wrongly, that the reason this is like this is because there's something wrong in their brain that they're like this. And to me, that whole, I don't have a point exactly, except to observe that like there are the number of men who are ending up failing to launch, who are ending up personally identifying with being autistic, or even jokingly accidentally mentally reinforcing that they got a bit of the tism because they think it's kind of a funny meme.
Can I interject here, because this is a very understated danger, is the joking, self-deprecating thing. And the example, I think we've brought it up in the past, but I'm going to bring it up again. The meme of white Sharia, which for those of you who were on certain parts of the internet in like 2015, before the alt-right became overtly white nationalist and actually had some interesting stuff that wasn't just racial. But there was a meme that like, oh, liberals seem to tolerate Islamic Sharia just fine, but they don't tolerate the much more moderate conservative Christian social values. So let's just rebrand just 1940s conservative Christian American values as white Sharia. It's like brown Sharia, but it's just white. It's just a different kind of Sharia, And it became a meme. It was actually kind of clever in its form, but the problem is that the semantic meaning and the context of the joke got lost, and you ended up essentially by power of repetition and by this thing Curtis Yarvin warns about, which is this temptation to inhabit the caricature that your opponents have crafted for you, eventually becomes strong, and what begins as a joke begins to you lean into it and you accept it unironically, and you say no actually I unironically like and the transition is very seamless. It can be very easy to slip there, and the transition from joking about the tism on 4chan to Pepe memes into actually sort of subconsciously believing you actually probably are on the autism spectrum to some degree can also be very seamless, and can open you up both to the illusions to your superiority of the sort we were talking about before. It's like, oh, you're immune to propaganda, so if something's persuasive to you, it must be real. It's like that is some killer genius level propaganda right there. But also, and I think this is to your point, it can be a kind of soft landing place and an easy route of displacement for feeling that you're being disenfranchised by a society that has been opposed to men, in principle, essentially, for
50 years now.
Yeah, well, at least 30 years, maybe 50.
Since the 70s, babe.
Has it been that long? Wow. Yeah, it's hard to track.
50 years ago.
I wonder when the Duluth model of domestic violence took off. I'll have to look that up. I imagine that was more of a 90s thing, but the seeds of it were definitely in the 70s. I think you're correct on that.
Oh, well, I mean, women in 1968, I think. I'm trying to think of what that year is. There's a year, the first year that women were able to sign for their own credit cards was 1973. So, this, and as we've said previously on other podcasts about feminism, like, I'm not necessarily intrinsically opposed to the idea that I should be able to sign for my own credit card or like go to the bank to represent my entire household. I don't hate that. It's frankly extremely practical. And so to the degree that it's worth it to break down societal barriers that prevent me from being able to do stuff that, like, practically it just doesn't make any sense why I shouldn't be able to do this, that's fine to me. It's and like you said with the white Sharia thing, it's like the tricky thing with all of these frankly almost like idea memes is that you kind of have to take the grab bag of all the crap that comes with it. And so you don't just get women being able to open bank accounts, you also get bra burnings and all this other, like, women need to be in the workforce and blah, blah, blah. Here we are now, right? And so I'm not trying to make this into like a...
I mean, I'm for bra burning.
We will discuss at a later date, babe. Privately, the status of bras or not bras. Anyway, I'm trying to make a joke out of it, and I can't figure out how to make it quickly enough. So the components are there. Make your own joke. So All of that, all of what I'm trying to say here is, yeah, it's a package deal, and I feel like the thread I'm trying to pull here is just to say that, like, I mean, Chris, my favorite thing about you has always been that you are unbelievably earnest, and one of the things that you've been on kind of a crusade about, not like every minute of every day, but like it comes up regularly, is, and I like this about you, you really are deeply earnest, and you reject at every turn that kind of, I don't know, what do you call Sarah Silverman's kind of comedy? I can't think of the word.
It's like hipster insincerity, I suppose.
Yes, insincerity. That's the word I was going for. So yeah, and I think a lot of these memes, they get those of us who feel very internet savvy, who feel very smart, and they convince us. They send us platitudes.
There's a kind of like feeling of sophistication that comes in cloaking yourself in irony, because you're not naive if you're constantly being ironic. You're so self-aware, and you can make fun of your own self-awareness, that taking anything seriously at all becomes like
it's so passé.
Yeah, it's passé, and it's also silly. But like it's actually not possible to function that way. And like all of the insincere, joking, mocking or self-mocking personas that we take on, whether it's in the memes we create or the kitschy making fun of the people making fun of the people making fun of vines that we do see on YouTube or whatever, like all of that become like it's Heraclitus. You are what you repeatedly do, and as you do these things, you can think you're not being serious, but your brain takes it more seriously than you think you're taking it. You're not that sophisticated.
Well, and moreover, like as you're talking about white Sharia, and as you're talking about just like what happens, this is your brain on drugs. You know, this is what happens when you repeat the same behavior all the time. The other thing that happens is that I think as an idea starts to take flight, you get new acolytes. And there's this idea of jumping the gap. There's a whole book called Jumping the Gap, and it's a marketing book about the bell curve of adoption of a new piece of technology or a new trend. And there's always going to be those, like, that first super tiny distribution, the first two standard deviations of the population that are so small, and those are always the like super cutting edge early adopters. They've got tons of fuck you money, they buy every trend. These are hot celebrities who wear weird clothes and like whatever. An idea is really sticky, and it will work if it can jump the gap between those first two super early adopters to the main population early adopters. And that's like 30% of the population, or no, that's like 15% of the population. Those become like kind of the trendsetters that actually like push the idea out. And then once they're gone, then you get the rest of the early majority, which I think is like 30%. I can't remember exactly the breakdown of what the standard deviation percentages are, but once you get over that gap into those early kind of very valent regular trendsetters, the rest of the bell curve is going to follow. Over time, you get those super laggards who like still don't have smartphones, but like there was a point at which it was either gonna go the way of the BlackBerry or it was gonna take off, and smartphones managed to jump the gap, and so now we all have them, right? And it's the same thing I think with ideas. You get these early adopters who are super edgy, and they're in on the original idea, you know, like they were there when I was there when the scrolls were written, like you're on the level. And then there's the people who catch the idea 6 months down the road, a year down the road, and who are seeing well-developed people, just like I'm talking about. This is why I gave my internet literacy example at the beginning. You get millennials who know how to work on the internet, being the people making most of the memes and content that now Gen Z has always been in that soup. They don't know Charlie the Unicorn. They don't know how far we've come on the internet.
Pleurodon Charlie.
They don't know what we went through, you know? And so to them, this is like our sophistication and our development on this line is just, that's how it is, right? That's how it always was, because that's how stupid brains work. All brains, not just stupid brains, all brains work, is that we reverse engineer it backwards as though this is how it always was. And so you get those people who they don't understand the spirit. They never had to reckon with the original like manifestation of the idea, and you're getting watered down SpongeBob that's all like everyone's gotten made one dimensional.
So can I offer then some possible therapy in a therapy culture?
Hang on. So what I'm trying to say with that point is to say that if you are one of these guys who is joking about the tism, ironically, you're like, haha, this is so funny or whatever. And I'm not saying that everyone has to take responsibility for everyone else, but like, I'm serious though. Your the sarcasm that you read as sarcasm on the internet is hard to distinguish. And so the other dudes that you're influencing.
A symptom of autism, right? If you can't read tone in normal conversation, but no one can read tone on the internet, so everyone thinks they're autistic on the internet.
Well, yes. Hang on. You keep slightly glancing off my idea, but you're correct. All your points are correct. What I'm trying to say is when we reinforce and we share the memes, when we're the ones. I mean, the most obvious example I see is when people are thirsty, and they're having a drought, and they share in their stories all the thirst traps they've been checking out, and it's like, dude, you are leading perfectly happy married dudes into sin. Why are you doing this? Like, I love you, and I'm sad. Seriously, like, get a girlfriend and stop posting thirst traps on the internet. All you're doing is, first of all, revealing your own sadness, and second of all, leading other people into sin here, people. But that's just like a small example of the phenomena that, like, when you share it and you know the context and then it goes out to, the community, other people don't know. And it slowly dilutes the message until eventually it becomes reality and reinforces like, oh, maybe me and all my friends who I like to hang out with and talk about guns, and we don't really talk about our personal lives. I'm like, haha, I guess we must just be autistic dudes hanging out, doing autistic dude stuff. And it's like, I was joking when I said that about like cracking a cold one with the bros. You know what I mean? Like, I was joking, but the guy receiving it, the guy who is being influenced by you, it doesn't necessarily know that. And the younger men behind you who are inheriting the internet you're helping to create don't know that.
And this does not mean that inverting the meme and talking about cracking a boy with the cold ones, you actually cannot become a vampire by doing that. We talk about you are what you repeatedly do, but
yes.
It doesn't.
Well, I mean, you can keep trying.
We don't recommend it.
So unauthorized. The results may vary, but and again, this is not intended to be a scolding. I think a significant portion of this was manufactured for us by generations of women trying to quote unquote level the field and all this kind of stuff.
Well, there is a whole lot of what is it, Munchausen by proxy, like that comes from talking about your child being disabled or challenged in some way, and the things that there might be a bit of a case of that in someone we know, in fact. But that like a therapy idea I have, sort of the inverse of what you've basically spent this whole podcast describing, is the problem of the internet shattering our sense of normalcy and opening us to a completely like hyper reality based notion of what is normal, is read old books. The number of people described as queer, and not queer in the 2020 sense of the term, but in the like 1620 sense of the term, as like very odd. Like most of them are people who could perhaps today be diagnosed as actually autistic, but were functional back then. They had a wife, they had 6-7 kids, they were a particularly odd kind of blacksmith that made door locks, or whatever the case was.
Or I mean, honestly, one of my favorite things, these aren't even necessarily old books, but my hyperfixation, see, we can use the words and we think it's funny, but that's exactly the lack of earnestness I'm trying to avoid. But seriously, one of my interests is I love books about really weird specific topics. So I read a whole book about paper clips and office supplies. I read a book about salt. I read a book about rabies. And you know what? Every single one of these books, especially the ones that when you like, they may have been written recently, but the books extolling like the history of geology, like when they discovered the layers and they realized like, oh, the world is tremendously older than we thought it was. The guy who wrote the entire English dictionary, that was a single dude self-funding. I don't know whether he had a wife or kids. Probably he did not. However, dude wrote the entire English. I'm not gonna lie, I forgot his name. I just read the book about him.
I think it was Samuel Johnson. I could be wrong.
The very first guy who wrote the English dictionary, the guy who discovered the Douglas fir. These were individual dudes who were super basically hyper fixated on a thing that nobody else gave two craps about except him, and he cared about it really hard. And ended up doing remarkable things. And so you go back in history, you look at normal people and things that people wrote in the past, and you realize this is actually, that was normal. These
Speaking of things written in the past, this is going to be a slight digression, but I do want to jump in.
We love digressions.
Because it occurred to me, I did a whole podcast on morality and autism, and none of what we're saying should be construed as the assertion that autism doesn't exist full stop. And it certainly doesn't mean that we should, trust in essentially autistic moral systems, which is, the subject of a previous podcast. I'll have to pull up the link to that in the show notes. So like these two things are mutually compatible. It can both be a real thing that is useful. Autism can be useful in its own niche areas, and also maybe not a great psychological foundation for creating systems of morality and sentiment that are not native to you and to your perceptual understanding or whatever the case was with Jeremy Bentham and Immanuel Kant, probably. So these two things can both be a problem in certain grand systems and also massively overdiagnosed and something like a Psy-Op in today.
Well, and we're wrapping up, but I want to throw in there too that it's like there's no better person to navigate someone else's superstructure than a bipolar woman with nothing better to do and a love of filling out preloaded forms. So, I mean, there is like, it's not horseshoe theory. It's like two hands meeting each other for mutual evil by accident, and it's just men create systems that are discernible and straightforward and logical, and if you do these things you'll ultimately succeed. And women say, I can hack that with my female brain that's really good at keeping track of dumb details, and rise to the top, or not rise to the top, but rise to the critically important the gatekeeping roles. Exactly. And then I reinforce that, like, well, you just need to fill out your paperwork, and pretty soon dudes who used to be able to navigate a normal size system can't get, like, there's a ceiling that they can't get past,
and are therefore pathological, and therefore we could diagnose them with something as the snake eating its own tail.
Right. So it's like it's sort of a sick cycle where we accidentally all are harnessing each other's pathologies for mutual destruction.
Speaking of sick circles, I feel like we've just come around to the Marxist socialist view of pathology. It's created by society, which is like, it's actually not wrong to a certain degree. The question is sort of like, what do you do about it? Yeah. And there's trade-offs and so forth.
And my conclusion is certainly, like, no revolution is required, and frankly, or desirable. And the reason why Marxism never works is because as soon as the revolutionary group gets any amount of status, they're like, woohoo, we won, and then they stop having that rage to revolt, and so they become fine. And I think that's in every one of us is the power to overcome these stupid psyops. So maybe think before you meme, and also, like, you touch the earth and read an old book, and you probably are not as autistic as maybe you think you are. And if this is my therapy from my heart to yours, if it ever occurs to you that, like, haha, I have the tism, or kind of like that went really well, like, or that went really poorly, and you're thinking if it appears in your brain, if the internet has placed in your brain the idea that maybe even a little bit of this is because of your autism, just demand evidence from that question, like, who put that word in your brain? Because I think it was the internet, and probably a bipolar woman.
Asking who told me this is such an underrated question. And it's one of those things that like people will often remember. I think I heard this from somewhere, but I can't remember where. But I feel like I heard it that that something is such and such, and that state of mind where you remember a bit of something but not the source is such a foot in the door into your head from all kinds of nefarious sources. I used to get made fun of for name dropping too much, but I persisted and continue to name drop like a shameless academic, and I will continue to do it, and not for anyone else's sake, but for my own sake, for maintaining a kind of mental organization of where did I get this from, and where did they get it from. And I actually had a very interesting experience a couple weeks ago where Vox Day, who I have said many positive things about and some negative things about, but largely positive, I think he's an interesting person to follow, shared a quote of Jordan Peterson saying, I think we should basically make these people into human sacrifices. It's unfortunate, but it's like something we have to do. Right, related to COVID or something. I don't remember the details. But
it was January 6th.
Yes. Oh, that's right. The insurrectionists. I'm being insincere. The protesters. There should be human sacrifices to peace, and I, to my shame, shared that before I checked. But I remember that I had gotten it from Vox Day, and some very noble followers actually watched the video that he sourced it from and said that was never said. He never said that. Never said anything remotely like that. And so I went back, dutifully listened to the whole thing. Yes, he never said that. Someone fabricated that, and turned out Vox Day had gotten it from anonymous conservative who had been sent it from somewhere else. An anonymous conservative retracted it. He's like, oh man, I might have screwed up. Shoot. To my knowledge, Vox Day never retracted that. And so knowing that about that source, Vox Day, and about anonymous conservative, is valuable. And it's helpful in evaluating future information. I'm not going to dismiss everything Vox Day says now. That would be an overreaction. He still says interesting things, but there's a little bit of an asterisk there now. It's like, okay, you gotta triple check this, and remembering those kinds of sources can be also helpful in avoiding not just autism as a Psy-Op, but all kinds of other suggestions, as hypnotists like to call them.
Yeah, I think I feel like I sounded a little too scoldy, so I apologize for revealing some of my bipolar disorder on you at the end there.
Don't do the insincere thing.
No,
talking about that.
No, it's true, but I didn't mean to come off in any way like scolding or overly educational, except what you just said is totally true. That like just being aware of where you're getting these ideas, and if nothing else, you may, like me, once this idea came into my mind that autism is a Psy-Op and they're trying to either funnel, this is how they're going to get men. They're going to funnel them into either, social irrelevance and long tail suicide by lack of social connection, or they're going to, try and divert them into woke. And like you can see for sure, like among the male to female trans that I've ever like seen, met, or interacted with, they all are like very autistic presenting, which I can't believe that word just came out of my mouth, but anyway, they appear very autistic to me. If they're not funneling them into like the equivalent of the sexual gulag to prevent them from being able to get their genes in the future, they're just diverting them toward just like straight up long tail suicide. Once I saw that, I can't unsee that that's what the secret motive is. And so I'd love to know if anybody else, once they start looking at, as you're just scrolling memes and stuff, does anybody else pick up on this? That it seems like there's an agenda for why we're so casually using like haha autism as a punchline in so many jokes and stuff. So yeah. It's something to observe as like kind of a trend moving around in the world. I'll also be interested to see when it is when they're no longer the most useful idiots, and when we move on to a new group.
I think Marxism is a part of it. I don't think it's the whole thing. I think there's.
I think it's also feminism, but
it's pharmaceutical interest. It's largely it was a thing back in like 2017, 2018 to accuse all MRAs of being autistic, and I think it's also a little bit, like we've talked about, a little bit self-imposed, like, oh, we're going to own the term, which is something feminists like to do too, in their own way. Yeah, like slut or whatever other words they like to try to reappropriate, which is not a good idea. But it's something to be mindful of. And I guess to the end of keeping track of sources, we should probably mention that some of this we were inspired to follow up from Jordan Peterson. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it came from just personal observation. One individual in my family in particular, but also just people on the internet talking. And I wonder how much of that is like, what now I'm thinking about it, like we see videos of people talking about autism, like I wonder how much of that's a hyper reality. Is that really so prevalent? Sort of a meta thing to think about, I suppose.
Yeah, the only reason I think it is working is because when I do go out into the wide world and see the people, there are a lot of people who are unironically identifying that way, or calling themselves like that. And it's so funny to me to hear people who, and this is why I specifically wanted to talk to your audience about it, is because it seems to be infecting otherwise decent potential youngish men. And it's really weird to hear men who so easily scoff at the trans movement in general be like, well, like they've totally TikTok diagnosed themselves as being autistic, and then they're like, just and then they own
4chan with TikTok with 4chan.
Yeah, and they own it in the same way that any trans person will be like, well, this is just who I really feel like I am on the inside or whatever. And it's like, whoa, what? You used to have like normal opinions on like guns and rights in America. Like, what happened to you?
And that's not how autistic people think, anyways.
Yeah. So it's been a very uncanny experience, and it's just something that I'm like, hopefully this particular social contagion and Psy-Op will eventually lose steam, because I'm already tired of it.
Yeah, that's that. Hopefully it will lose steam. So thanks for listening to us meander around this subject. There'll be more on these kinds of things, I think, coming up. Psy-Ops more generally. I'm excited to have this next conversation as well. This one was quite good, though. I think it's one of underrated importance, not just for autism, but for the other things that people do or could try with these kinds of mechanisms of priming and persuasion and suggestion. So anyways, thanks so much for listening, and take care.